You can always count on Mike Flanagan to give you spiraling existential anxiety and cry and leave the viewing experience determined to make the most of your life.
The world, Chuck. Everything you've ever loved. Everything you see.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Following up on the video I did on the source material, which is the Stephen King novella of the same name, I am now here to talk about the film adaptation of The Life of Chuck. I will be going into full spoilers with this one because of it being an adaptation, and also because I am interested in discussing specific details about how this was adapted. If all you would like to know is whether or not I recommend it, and you haven't seen my post on Letterboxd, I really enjoyed this. I gave it a 4.4 out of 5. Dr. Sleep is still undoubtedly my favorite Mike Flanagan film, and it's not even close, but this was still a beautifully made film, and I would really love it if more people went and saw it and gave it the attention it deserves. Now, let's get into specifics. I think a fair few lukewarm responses I've seen to this are from people who have not read the source material, and I'm not entirely sure if all of those naysayers have really put together the deeper meaning of what's being addressed, or even just the basic narrative, although to me it seems quite obvious if you watch and care enough to pay attention to what's happening. I was pleasantly surprised that the film kept so much of the flow of information in the same order as the book. The film goes from Act 3 to 2, then 1, which is the same as it was in the novella. I thought that they might play around with the order the way that they did with the adaptation of a different Stephen King short story adaptation that was released this year, which is The Monkey. In the film, we have Act 3, thanks Chuck, in which we are first introduced to Marty Anderson, a high school teacher, and much of what we see about the world ending, and the parent-teacher conferences is similar to the source material, although I do love getting to see certain details that can only exist on film because of the differences in how information gets presented. For example, when one of the parents is talking about his wife having run away to try to be with her high school sweetheart, because at this point the world's ending and it really makes you think about who you want to be with in the end. Chiwetel Ejiofor, he does this thing where he kind of knowingly smiles to himself. It's such a small expression, but if you already know the source material, which I do, I watched that for the first time and immediately I know that he's thinking about his ex-wife. And I found it to be really moving, even though it was such a seemingly small detail. I audibly gasped out loud in horror when the TV went out in the middle of Marty watching Gene Kelly dancing in CoverGirl. If you're going to take away Gene Kelly dancing, then honestly, end the world right then and there. Pack it up. You had a good run. Throughout the film, we had Nick Offerman doing the narration, which was such an interesting choice to me. Definitely an unexpected one, but I ended up finding it to be rather charming. I think that because Nick Offerman, for me, is so synonymous with comedy, whether that's Parks and Recreation or even his cameo in Dix the Musical, I found that his narration almost added an element of dark humor to what was going on that I wouldn't have otherwise thought of. It's just a slight modification to the tone compared to the source material, but I would liken this adaptation to something like The Truman Show, where we are being a voyeur to a man's entire life. Even though that's more or less a premise we as moviegoers do for every movie that we watch, follow the character, there's just a very specific vibe that The Life of Chuck has that feels voyeuristic in a different way. The narration almost brings that voyeurism to the forefront of your consciousness, where you become more aware of it. When Marty is on the phone with his ex-wife Felicia, and he is walking through his house, and he gets a glimpse up some stairs to a door with a lock on it, I was immediately intrigued. And I thought to myself, is that the cupola? I'm telling you, if you haven't read the source material, but you have watched the film, you need to rewatch the film a second time because there are so many details like these that Mike Flanagan added to flesh various things out. And I love these choices that he made as a storyteller. Everything is woven together beautifully, but if you are going into a first watch without knowing what you're getting yourself into, you might miss some of those details. Marty going on that long explanation about the calendar reminded me a bit of the Lemon monologue from The Fall of the House of Usher, which, if you saw my video on the Life of Chuck novella, you will know that that is my favorite Mike Flanagan series. Conceptually, it's similar in the sense that it's a really big monologue where you give one of your lead actors the chance to really show what they're capable of, but it also summarizes a major theme or thesis of the overall story. With the Life of Chuck, there is this exploration of life and death, how small the existence of each person is in the grand scheme of the universe, and yet every person is significant and has their own world inside of them. So if you didn't already know this, Marty Anderson, his ex-wife Felicia, and the vast majority of characters we meet in Act 3 exist in a world that is inside of Chuck's mind. That spooky scene where Felicia is at the hospital with her coworker Bree, played by Rahul Kohli, and all the machines are not hooked up to any patients, but they're beeping on the same frequency. That was them beeping the life monitor readings of Chuck, who is in a coma at this point, on his deathbed, actually. And so when Chuck dies, so does the universe inside of him that he has been building for his entire life. Earlier on, though, before that happens, when Marty encounters the little girl with the rollerblades, I was going, oh, wait a minute, what is Katie from the Megan movies doing here? That was my first reaction because I am currently being bombarded with promotion for Megan 2.0. You don't need to convince me, I will see it. But of course, I immediately also remembered that this actress was also in Dr. Sleep, and any Mike Flanagan viewer will know that he loves to repeatedly cast the same actors in his projects. If you're available and willing, and you haven't done something horrible to make him stop hiring you, you will be brought back. I also appreciate the seemingly small alteration, but it makes perfect sense to alter it, still in Act 3, where when Chuck is on his deathbed, he is with his wife and son. In the novella, it was his brother-in-law and son, which really makes little sense when you think about that. Of course it should be his wife to say the final words that are all over these advertisements that are appearing inside of his mind that the people who are in there are seeing. Moving on to Act 2, which is when Chuck does his dance number with a random woman in the crowd that gathered once he began to dance. Her name is Janice. There are two details I wanted to hone in on when talking about Act 2. When they are giving these visual glimpses and narration insights into Chuck's past to try to give the audience a bit of understanding about why he starts dancing. In the novella, he refers to Janice as little sister when he invites her to join him in the dance. And the reason he does that is because he used to dance with the little sister of one of his band members when he was still a kid in school. The narrator in the film mentions that band, the Retros, but they don't mention Chuck dancing with the little sister. What they do instead is show you in Act 1 the origins of Chuck's love for dancing coming from his grandmother, and she asks young Chuck to dance with her in their kitchen, and she calls him little brother. And that was the moment, the very first moment that I cried. Listen, I knew it would happen eventually. It's a Mike Flanagan project, but I just lost it because that was such a good alteration to make to the source material. It packed a much stronger emotional gut punch, and that is why Mike Flanagan is a villain. He will emotionally disrupt your day. You thought you were going to be calm? You thought you were just going to go about your usual routine? Nope. It's time to stop and have a cry break, and it's all Mike Flanagan's fault. The other detail I wanted to mention from Act 2 is that when Chuck has finished this day with Janice, his impromptu dance partner, and Taylor, the drummer whose busking sparked the big dance number to happen in the first place, you see a young girl rollerblading through the street, whom Chuck briefly observes. That is the same young girl rollerblading in his mind in Act 3 that we saw Marty meet when he was on his way to go see Felicia. And we also see Bree sitting outside having a coffee. He's just a man whom Chuck sees that ends up being part of Chuck's inner world. And this isn't some sort of supernatural science fiction story where it's these actual people being transported into Chuck's brain as if they're being kidnapped by the magic school bus or something like that. It's more poetic, as explained in Act 1, when Miss Richards, who is Chuck's teacher, is explaining Walt Whitman to him. Oh, and that was yet another thing. When the film begins and we see Marty Anderson teaching his students, he is teaching them a lesson on Walt Whitman, and more specifically, that exact work that we explore in more depth in Act 1. There are so many details Mike Flanagan did to thread everything together in even more detail than the novella, and I'm very happy with his approach and creative choices in regard to all of that. But anyway, moving into Act 1, more officially speaking, beginning. This is where we really flesh everything out in detail. I could go into as many of those details as possible, but I would like to try to consolidate my feedback considering that I am working on 3 videos in one sitting. It's this one, my Materialists review, as well as my review of We Were Liars. One of the further reveals of people we met in Act 3 is that Marty Anderson was the teacher in The Next Classroom Over to Miss Richards in Act 1. You also see him as one of the chaperones at the school dance, along with Felicia. Being that there was so much care given to showcasing Matthew Lillard in Act 3 as Gus, Marty's neighbor, I'm going to assume he also popped up somewhere else in Act 2 or 1, but maybe I missed that one while I was scribbling down notes in my notepad, as I always do when I'm planning to do a film review here on YouTube. The older man that Marty met while he was walking to Felicia's place, Sam, that man appears in Act 1 as the funeral director whom Chuck interacted with a fair bit because his grandfather Albie worked for that funeral home as their accountant, and he was the one to provide Chuck with information and paperwork after Albie passed away. He even had the same dream of wanting to be a weatherman that was first introduced in Act 3. A fair bit of what Albie said comes back in the later acts, showing how formative he is to whom Chuck becomes. For example, he is the reason Chuck became an accountant. While Chuck is watching television, he sees a program that explains that calendar analogy about how young the human species is in the grand scheme of the universe, which Marty later says on the phone to Felicia. Mike Flanagan has a cameo at the funeral of Chuck's grandmother, and I almost jumped up and turned into that one Leonardo DiCaprio meme when I saw him. No, not that one. The other one. Chuck's grandfather intervening and stopping Chuck from going into the cupola while he was a child. That was something that was not in the novella, but it was a nice addition to really drive home the point about how spooky the cupola is. It was also properly scary. It really felt like the Mike Flanagan most of us are more familiar with, and also better at implanting certain information in the audience's mind, because if they haven't read the source material, Grandpa Albie drunkenly mentioning the bread in relation to his wife's eventual death, I don't know if that's going to be made clear enough for the audience to be able to piece that together. Now, if you're watching this movie review, I'm going to assume that you're more actively interested in the film medium and you're more open to really engaging closely with the art and paying closer attention to those types of details. But if we think about some of the more casual moviegoers, I don't think it hurts to add just a small bit more information to communicate how the cupola is a spooky place that will show you a premonition of death. For anyone that feels like the different chapters are too disjointed or that they're not as connected as you would like for them to be, I really would implore you to watch the film again. Now, I can't speak from a first-hand experience of watching the film without already knowing the story beforehand, because I did read the source material and make a video about that. But in theory, I could understand the idea that some viewers might not have pieced everything together on a first watch. But that being said, I don't think this film is anywhere near as complicated or esoteric as some of the more esoteric art house films that have had a very divisive reaction, especially from a general audience. I don't think an ending explained video is necessary to be able to make sense of this story. I think if you watch the film twice or read the source material and then watched the film once, that's already enough to be able to appreciate so much of what's great and beautiful and moving about the film. I really hope that more people give it a chance, because if we get stuck in another long hiatus where Mike Flanagan is banished to television and not given the space and opportunity to do another feature film that I can watch on the big screen, I am going to be annoyed. And I say that as someone that has enjoyed watching multiple series Mike Flanagan has made. But Dr. Sleep released in 2019, and now The Life of Chuck has not gotten its theatrical release into the cinemas until 2025. That is an unacceptably long amount of time to wait for a new theatrical experience from Mike Flanagan. Watch Dr. Sleep, watch The Life of Chuck, and live your life in a way that makes it mean something significant. Make a difference to others.